that only the strong may continue to live in freedom and in peace. We are well aware of the circumstances, the tragic circumstances in lands across the sea, which have forced upon our nation the need to take measures of total defense.
The 193rd came into existence at a time when a lot was changing in how the U.S. Army viewed tanks. Before 1940, tanks were mainly dispersed among infantry and cavalry units, serving primarily as support for those branches. One of the leading advocates for changing the approach in this was General Adna R. Chaffee, who believed armor units could be far more effective if organized and employed as individual combat units. Germany's rapid advance into Poland and France appeared to validate many of these ideas. It also added urgency to the Army's own efforts to modernize. On July 10, 1940, the War Department established the Armored Force and reorganized existing tank units into a unified armored formation. The 193rd would become a part of this modernization. But just how large was America's armored force in 1941? When the men of the 193rd entered into federal service in January 1941, they were joining a surprisingly small community of tankers scattered across only a handful of installations around the country. In January 1941, America's entire tank force could be found just at 4 major posts: at Fort Knox, which served as the headquarters for the Army's newly created Armored Force and the home of the Armored Force School. We also had the home of the 1st Armored Division and the housing of the 69th Armor Regiment and the 192nd Tank Battalion following its induction into federal service on November 25, 1940. Further south, at Fort Benning, Georgia, was the home of the 2nd Armored Division. Stationed there is the 66th, 67th, and 68th Armored Regiments. It was also here that the 4 National Guard companies of the newly formed 193rd Tank Battalion would come together, training alongside as they transformed into a unified armored battalion. And to the east, at Fort Meade, Maryland, we have stationed the 70th Tank Battalion and the 191st Tank Battalion, which served as independent armored units during the Army's rapid expansion. And on the west coast, we have Fort Lewis, Washington, which was home to the 194th Tank Battalion. Beyond the continental United States, one final armor unit was stationed in the territory of Hawaii, the 11th Tank Company at Schofield Barracks, a story deserving its own video. From these few units grew the Army's wartime armored force. Although officially activated as a battalion, the 193rd did not arrive at Fort Benning all at once. Instead, its 4 National Guard companies traveled from their hometown armories across the country, converging on Fort Benning during the middle of January 1941. Each company arrived with its own commander, traditions, and identity. Along with the men, each company carried its 2 tanks from its guard unit days with it to Fort Benning. Company A started out in Forsyth, Georgia, under the command of Captain Wesley Willingham, with the support of 1st Lieutenant Kenneth Hollis and 2nd Lieutenants Hill Searcy, Robert Biddick, and Ernest Morgan. For Company A, medical examinations began on January 6th under the supervision of Captain George Williams of Fort Benning. The Friday prior to departure, the American Legion of Forsyth, Georgia, held a barbecue for Company A. The Sunday following the barbecue, everybody in town reported to the First Baptist Church, holding a Union service with the men before their departure to Fort Benning. On Tuesday morning, January 14th, as family and friends gathered to bid them farewell, Company A departed Forsyth for Fort Benning. Among those in attendance was Monroe County's last surviving Confederate veteran, George Waldrop, who came dressed in his Confederate uniform to see his grandson, Corporal Fred Waldrop, depart for federal service. Later that afternoon, Company A completed the 90-mile journey to Fort Benning and began to set up tents in the woods 10 miles south of Columbus. For Company B, roll was called at Fort Dale Armory at 8 a.m. Monday morning, January 6, 1941, with every man present. 4 medical officers from Fort Benning began the physical examinations, and of the 114 men examined, 107 passed. Afterwards, the company was divided into platoons, and training began under the supervision of Captain Lewis Johnson, a veteran of the Great War. By Johnson's side was Captain Lonnie Melton, a fellow veteran of the Rainbow Division as well that served in the Great War. Complementing the officer staff was First Lieutenants Harry Andrews and Euless Dansby, Second Lieutenants Teddy Dees, Alex Dowling, John Jernigan, George Carroll, and Ralph Wells. During the first week, the men were quartered at Fort Dale Armory. On Friday night, the town of Ozark held a square dance in the community house, with parents, wives, and sweethearts admitted free. Other friends and visitors cost 25 cents each. The following Monday afternoon, a farewell ceremony was held at Fort Dale. Among those in attendance were fellow members of the old G Company 167th Infantry that had served alongside Captain Johnson in the Great War. Many of these were also retired members of the old Ozark Tank Company. Early the next morning, January 14th, Company B left Ozark by truck convoy. According to the local newspaper accounts, the convoy consisted of 17 large trucks, a station wagon, a reconnaissance vehicle, 2 tanks, and a motorcycle. With this motor vehicle convoy, 9 officers and 107 enlisted men left Ozark en route to Fort Benning, arriving at about 2 p.m. As the January 6 activation deadline approached, Captain John Burns called for 25 additional recruits to bring Company C to wartime strength. 3 weeks earlier, December 11th, he had buried his wife Peggy. Now, with federalization underway, he turned his attention to preparing Company C for the move to Fort Benning. Like the other companies of the 193rd Tank Battalion, the week of January 6 was devoted to physical examinations and final preparations for federal service. While the enlisted men completed their medical examinations, Captain John Burns and his officers, First Lieutenant John M. Ayler and Wade R. Cunningham, together with Second Lieutenants Earl Douglas and Ferdinand Andre, prepared the company for its transfer to Fort Benning. Unlike Companies A and B, which were close enough to Fort Benning to travel by motor convoy, Company C faced a journey of nearly 800 miles from Houston. To move both its personnel and equipment efficiently, the company was divided into 2 detachments. On January 12th, a motor convoy consisting of First Lieutenant John Ayler and 22 enlisted men departed Houston with Company C's organizational vehicles. While in Houston, Captain Burns wrote to the mayor of Lafayette, Louisiana, asking whether overnight accommodations could be provided for the motor detachment under Lieutenant Ayler. Mayor Maxine Roy responded by offering the Lafayette Community Center, where Ayler and his men would spend the night. With the overnight stop in Lafayette behind them, Lieutenant Ayler and his men continued east, stopping in Gulfport, Greenville, and then arriving in Fort Benning on January 15th. The rest of Company C boarded a Southern Pacific train on January 14th. 24 hours later, they stepped off the train at Fort Benning, where Lieutenant Ayler and the motor detachment were waiting. For the first time since leaving Houston, Company C was together again. Company D departed Denver on Sunday, January 12th. The company was commanded by Captain Lou Appledorn. Assisting him were First Lieutenants Edwin B. Allen and Walter F. Anderson, together with Second Lieutenants Russell Kochnet and Millard Inskeep, Harold Spitzer, and Julian Sue. The company's tank and equipment had been loaded aboard a special train at Golden the previous evening. The men boarded the following morning. Before leaving Denver, the train paused for an hour at Union Station, giving family and friends one final opportunity to say their goodbyes. Traveling by way of Pueblo to Kansas City to Chicago and then to Birmingham, the company arrived at Fort Benning at noon on January 15th. By the evening of January 15th, all four companies of the 193rd Tank Battalion had arrived and were assembling in tents just north of the Armored Force Cantonment area. As senior officer present, Captain Lewis Johnson became the battalion's first commanding officer on January 15, 1941. His promotion passed command of Company B to First Lieutenant Harry Andrews. 5 days later, on January 20th, Headquarters and Headquarters Company was organized. The officers who had commanded the four companies assumed key positions within the new battalion headquarters. Captain Lou Appledorn became the battalion's personnel officer, Captain John Burns the battalion's operational officer, and Captain Wesley Willingham joined Headquarters Company, and Captain Lonnie Melton became the battalion's supply officer. While the officers organized the battalion and established its headquarters, the enlisted men were settling into life at Fort Benning's sprawling tent city. Corporal Lowell Weeks volunteered to serve as the camp's humorous correspondent for the hometown newspaper, the Southern Star. Writing under the pen name of Mufty, he gave readers back home a first-hand look at camp life at Fort Benning, calling it the land of pine trees and city of tents. He also wrote about the men's first days of clearing company areas, erecting tents, and turning an empty field into a functional military camp. General Order Number 3 established the battalion's daily routine. Reveille sounded at 5:45 each morning, followed by calisthenics, breakfast, drill, and a full day of training before retreat, and taps ended the day. The routine transformed 4 separate National Guard companies into a single battalion operating on the same schedule. Despite the winter weather, Weeks reported that the tents were comfortable, housing 4 to 5 men each and heated by small wood-burning stoves. Those stoves provided welcome warmth during the cold January nights, but they also presented a constant fire hazard. General Order Number 4 established strict fire prevention regulations, reminding every soldier that a single carelessly tended stove could threaten an entire camp of canvas tents. Weeks joked about the unexpected cold, writing that he had slept in 2 pairs of long underwear for the first time in 15 years. As January drew to a close, the men of the 193rd were still living under canvas, but the battalion was beginning to take shape. Headquarters Company had been organized, a daily routine had been established, new officers had assumed their duties, and the first soldiers were already being selected for specialized training. The transformation from 4 separate National Guard tank companies into a unified battalion was well underway.